Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Michael Thompson. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the building operations manager for the Office of the Chancellor at UC Berkeley, and I am the moderator for this session. Our IT support is provided by Teresa Ajari. Thank you, Teresa. So I have the pleasure of welcoming everyone today to Mastering Memory to Unlock Your Potential and Enhance Professional Success. This is given by Memory Champion Chester Santos. I am happy to introduce you to Chester Santos by way of video. So, Teresa, when you're ready, let's start the video.
That worked. We just did some mental athletic training with Chester Santos, who has the best memory in the United States.
With babies. Joining us right now is memory expert and winner of the 2008 USA National Memory Championship, Chester Santos.
If you have trouble remembering names, faces, where you put the coffee cup, or if you do Chester Santos, he can help. He's a 2008 National Memory Champion, here to help us.
Certainly knows he does. Chester Santos is the United States Memory Champion. He captured the title this past weekend in New York City. There he is accepting the prize. He's now going to
This is the 12th district in New Jersey College. Threshold. Okay. And three to go. 2 of 12. Yes. Jack of diamond. You got it. And 3 of diamond. Unbelievable.
That's incredible.
We have Carol, Rick, Pedro, Jack, Andy.
Every single time he's got the power to educate, the power to drill and memorize. Oh, that's something isn't say something about it. Some of this techniques stretch all the way back to the ancient Greeks. But what's amazing is that standing in front of you as a modern human being, I can still feel those techniques programming my brain to remember things better.
All right. Hello there, everybody. My name is Chester Santos, also known as the International Man of Memory. Thank you so much, everybody, for having me today as your speaker for the NOW conference. I attended UC Berkeley, earned a degree in psychology. Soon after, I ended up winning the United States National Memory Championship. Since then, I've gone on to give presentations in more than 30 different countries on how anyone can develop powerful memory skills and utilize those skills to be more successful professionally, personally. Also, if you happen to have any kids or grandkids in school, what we talk about today is going to be very useful to share with them as well. My focus is going to be on enhancing professional development. Memory is fundamental to learning and the acquisition of knowledge. So when you improve your ability to remember, it has a dramatic positive impact on many different areas of your life. You're definitely going to get more ROI, return on investment, from your training and development efforts if you can better retain and recall the information. The presentation is going to be very interactive over the next hour or so. Some of what I ask you to do is going to seem a little bit strange or unusual, but please bear with me, because I promise you that these strange things that I ask you to do today, they're going to really improve your ability to remember just about anything at all. Let's get started. I'd like everybody to close your eyes if you can, wherever you're attending this. Please close your eyes if you can. And with your eyes closed, I want for you to do your best to visualize what I described to you. I want for you to picture yourself in your current residence. You are in the living room area of your residence, and you see there, standing behind podiums, looking as if they are about to engage in a debate, you see Dwayne Johnson, also known as The Rock, that famous actor. He's standing behind one podium. Standing behind the other is Brad Pitt, another famous actor. These two actors look as if they're about to debate in your living room, and although that strikes you as really weird, rather than ask any questions, you decide to just hang back and observe what's going on. So they debate there. They begin to debate. The debate is becoming more and more heated between those two movie stars. At one point, you see The Rock become visibly upset at something that Brad Pitt says. So he reaches behind his podium to pull out a pie. He takes this pie, throws it at Brad Pitt, splat, it hits him square in the face. You can see the pie dripping off Brad Pitt's face. He is not happy about this at all. So he now reaches behind his podium to also pull out a pie, takes it, throws it at The Rock, splat, it hits The Rock in the face. You can see pie dripping off of The Rock now as well. What started off as a debate has now turned into a full-blown pie fight. These actors are continuously throwing pies at each other. You can worry about who's going to clean up the living room later. Just try and see this happening in your mind to the best of your ability. You are primarily at this point experiencing images running through your head. You have imagery running through your mind. What I'd like you to do now is attempt to involve even more senses as you experience this scenario happening. In addition to seeing it, imagine that you can hear that pie as it splatters on the actors. So at this point, you can see the pie fight happening and you can hear it as well. I'd like for you now to also imagine that you can smell the pie. Stretch your imagination. Imagine what that pie smells like. Let's take this further. Imagine that you walk up to one of those actors and you take some of the pie off of their face. You feel it in your hands. Maybe it feels sort of sticky. Go ahead now, even put some of that pie in your mouth. Go ahead and taste that pie. Hopefully it's tasting pretty good to you, although a lot of people tell me that it tastes like actor or movie star at this point. Okay, if you did, in fact, have your eyes closed, you can go ahead and open them now. That was the end of the opening visualization exercise. A lot of people find that to be a fun exercise to go through. Everyone finds that pretty easy to complete, but what does that exercise have to do with improving your ability to remember things like names, to get much more out of networking, presentations, training material to enhance professional development? In fact, that exercise has a lot to do with all of that and much more, because I had you there exercise one, visualization. All right. Visualization ability is very powerful. Visuals can greatly enhance your ability to remember important information. An example that I like to cite in my presentations around the world is the situation that we've all experienced at some point in our life where we will see somebody that we could have met years ago. We may have met that person years in the past. Oftentimes, right away, as soon as we see their face, we remember their face. We know that we've met them somewhere before, but we can't seem to remember the name. Very common situation. I think something else that a lot of people can relate to, let's say you go to a party, you're meeting a lot of new people at this party. 2 weeks after it's over, you're talking with one of your friends that was also there, and your friend describes someone to you from the party. Your friend says, hey, you remember that attorney that we met at the party a couple weeks ago? He's also a member of the tennis club. As your friend is going through the description of the person, a lot of times you can picture in your mind exactly who they're talking about. You might even pull up in your mind what that person was wearing at the party when you met them. But a lot of times you cannot recall the name. Your friend also cannot recall the person's name. And it's a very frustrating situation. A third and final example I'd like to give related to this: how many times have you been describing to a friend or family member an actor from a TV show or movie? As you're going through this description of the actor, crystal clear in your mind, you can picture who you're talking about. Your friend or family member can also picture who you're talking about, but neither one of you can come up with the name at that moment. It's another frustrating situation. I think that those three examples that I just went over illustrate pretty well that when it comes to dealing with people, we tend to be pretty good at remembering, calling to mind what people look like, their faces, but we're not nearly as good at remembering people's names. So when you think about it, this makes sense because when we interact with people in various ways, the face is recorded into our visual memory. We see the face, but the name is something much more abstract to the brain. So one way you can become so much better at remembering names is to turn the names into powerful visuals. When I meet someone named Mike, a lot of times I will picture a microphone. If I meet someone named Alice, a lot of times I will picture a white rabbit because that reminds me of Alice in Wonderland. Now, it may seem a little bit weird or silly, but it's very powerful and effective. It's how I will open presentations at conferences and corporate events all around the world. When I'm live and in person, I will open with naming hundreds of people in the audience after just hearing each name one time. That is because I'm turning the name into something I can picture. I'm going to get into names in much more detail toward the end of the presentation today. But for now, what I want for you to know is the power of visuals, visual representations again of the information, make it much easier to recall it when you need it later on. The second thing that I'd like for you to take away from that opening exercise with the Rock and Brad Pitt, the second principle is that in addition to seeing that, I then had you start to get more and more senses involved, right? As you do that, you will be activating more and more areas of your brain and building more and more connections in your mind to the information, making it so much easier to recall later on. So I actually started in an episode of PBS's Nova Science. The episode that I starred in was titled How Smart Can We Get? Or maybe it will be easier later to just Google my name, Chester Santos, and PBS. You can actually check it out for free on the PBS website. If you do that, you'll see me performing some pretty crazy memory feats on the show. Then they had me train David Pogue, who you might know from the New York Times and CBS News. He's been a correspondent for the tech industry. I trained him. He was then able to perform some pretty cool memory feats on the show. Next, after that, they had some brain scientists, neuroscientists come on the show and explain for people watching at home on TV, how did Chester do that? How was David Pogue able to do it with just a little bit of training from Chester? These brain scientists, neuroscientists confirmed that it's because with the memory techniques that I've mastered over the years and that you all are going to start to learn about during the presentation today, what's happening is we're recruiting extra areas of the brain to help us, areas of the brain that most people never involve when committing things to memory. With these techniques, we're activating more of the brain, and part of this is learning to use more senses when you're first encoding the information into memory. So to summarize that point, the more senses that are involved, the more of the brain's active, it becomes easier to recall the information later. The third and final principle that I'd like for you to take away from that opening exercise with the Rock and Brad Pitt is that in addition to seeing that pie fight, then involving additional senses, I made the entire scenario pretty weird, out of the ordinary. You would never expect to see that happening in the middle of your living room. And that is because I'd like for you today to learn to take advantage of the psychological aspect to human memory. And that is all of us, with putting forth little to no effort, we tend to remember things that catch us by surprise, that are weird, extraordinary in some way. Now, if this were to happen right now, at this moment, if wherever you're at, if in the room that you're in, an elephant crashed into the room right now and started to spray water all over you with its trunk, if that actually happened right now, you would probably remember that for the rest of your life. Even 30, 40 years from now, you might be telling the story at a dinner. You're never going to believe this. So I attended the Now conference. I was in a memory session on Zoom, and while I was in the room, an elephant crashed in and started to spray water on me. That might be stuck in your brain forever without any effort on your part to commit it to memory. To this day, scientists still don't fully understand how that works in the brain. How is it that sometimes in one instant, Something will go straight into long-term memory, stay there forever, whereas other times we might spend weeks, months trying to drill important, useful information to memory, and it can be difficult. Now, although it isn't fully understood, we need to realize there is this aspect to how human memory works, to how the mind works. We can then harness it and apply it to things that would be very useful to remember, such as names, to build better relationships with people, get more out of networking, presentations, foreign language vocabulary, training material, and much more. Now, when you combine the 3 principles that I just went over, very quick review was simply 1, visuals, 2, if you can, involve additional senses from there, and 3, while you're doing that, seeing and experiencing this in your mind, try to make it extraordinary, weird in some way. When you put those 3 things together, instantly it becomes easier to remember really anything at all. Now, we are going to put this into practice, everybody, with a fun and interactive exercise. You're not allowed to write anything down here. You can't use any electronic device to aid you. I know people aren't used to this, but we're going to give it a shot. You're all going to commit to memory the following random list of words. No notes, all right? Monkey, iron, rope, kite, house, paper, shoe, worm, envelope, pencil, river, rock, tree, cheese, and dollar, right? That is the list of words. Now, when I have live in-person audiences and I can see the looks on people's faces, people usually look at me at this point in the presentation like I'm a little bit crazy. They really don't think that they're going to be able to remember that, not unless I give you a lot of time to do it. But in fact, you're all going to have that list of words committed to memory perfectly, forwards and backwards, with just about 3 minutes of study time. And with no further review after today, weeks, I get people even emailing me months after a presentation, wanting to demonstrate to me they can't believe that they still remember all of those words. You will know this forwards, backwards, remember it perhaps even for months with just a few minutes of effort. How you're going to do this, you're just going to listen to what I described to you, see and experience it happen in your mind, just as you did in that opening exercise with those movie stars, The Rock and Brad Pitt. The key here is just relax. We're going to spend just a few minutes on this. Relax, have fun. If you're smiling and giggling, it's a good sign that you're going to remember everything. I know that the intro video was a little bit choppy. My apologies for that, but you would have noticed on the video one of my CNN clips where I had to memorize a half deck of cards during the commercial break. Then when they came back live on the air after just about 2 minutes or less, I had to recite that perfectly from memory. You can watch it again on my website, or I believe it's also on the Now Conference website. If you take a look, you'll see when I'm memorizing the cards, I'm smiling, I'm giggling. I was nervously moving the table a bit. I think they might have thought I was a little bit crazy when I was on that show, but that's the key here, all right? Just have fun. If you're all smiling and giggling, you're gonna get this perfect, all right? So let's go through with this, get started. Monkey was the first word, so I want for you all to visualize a monkey. You can do this now with your eyes opened or closed, whatever's more comfortable for you in terms of visualization. The monkey is dancing around making monkey noises. Boop, 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 whatever a monkey would sound like. I'm working on my monkey impression, but the point here is to see and hear that monkey. The monkey now picks up a gigantic iron, because that was the next word. The monkey is dancing around this gigantic iron. The iron starts to fall, but a rope attaches itself to the iron. Maybe even feel that rope, interact with it. Maybe it feels sort of rough. You look up the rope now and you see that the other end of the rope is attached to a kite. This kite is flying around in the air. You reach up and try and touch it, but it's just out of your reach maybe. That kite. The kite now crashes into the side of a house. Really see it smash into the house. You notice that this house is completely covered in paper. For some weird reason, it's totally covered in paper. The next word I had given you was paper. Out of nowhere, a shoe appears and it starts to walk all over that paper. Maybe it's messing it up as it's walking on it. Visualize that shoe. The shoe smells pretty badly, so you decide to investigate and see why. And you see inside of the shoe a little worm, a smelly worm is crawling around. See that worm. The worm now jumps out of the shoe and into an envelope. Really see it go into the envelope. Maybe it's going to mail itself or something. I don't know. But envelope was next. Out of nowhere, a pencil appears and it starts to write all over the envelope. Maybe it's addressing it. Really see that pencil. The pencil now jumps into a river and there's a huge splash like you would never expect to see. When it hits the river is crashing up against a giant rock. This rock flies out of the river and it smashes into a tree. Picture that. See it smashing into the tree. This tree is growing cheese. You probably haven't seen a tree like that. This one is growing cheese. And out of the cheese shoots a dollar. I want you to see a dollar fly right out of that cheese. Picture that dollar. Now, that was the last word, dollar. You may already have this down, but we're going to review this again. I'm going to run through this little story that you've created in your mind in about 30 seconds. Do your best to just visualize this all over again. We started off with the monkey. The monkey was dancing around with what? See that iron? Something attached itself to the iron. I want you to see and feel that rope. You look up the rope. The other end was attached to a kite. That kite then crashed into see the house. It was totally covered in. See that paper. Something walked all over that paper. I want you to see the shoe. We had something crawling in the shoe. It was smelly. It was the worm. The worm jumped into the envelope. See it going to the envelope. Then what was writing on it? A pencil. The pencil jumped into the river. It crashed into a rock. That flew into the tree, which was growing cheese. And what came out of the cheese? I want you to see that dollar. Now, it should be fairly easy to recall all of those random words in order by simply running through that story, that little cartoon or movie that you have playing in your minds. Just see it, and each major object that you encounter in the story is going to give you the next random word. Now, I'd like for you all actually to take about 3 minutes, 2 to 3 minutes, and write those out from memory in the chat. You can write them out to everyone. Now, even if you aren't, and we're going to call out some random answers, your name and what you've written down there. Even if you aren't brave enough to write your answers out in the chat, please at least try to run through this mentally and see if you can recall all of those words by playing through this story that you've created. All right, I'm going to give you about 2 minutes, and then we will see what we end up with. We have a lot of answers coming in already. I'll still give you guys, though, a couple more minutes. Thank you so much for participating in the exercise. I promise I'm going to get into the practical applications of all of this stuff as we move on with the presentation. This does not just apply to random words. There are very useful professional development applications for this sort of technique, and we'll get into that later on. But for now, we're learning the basics, going through some simple exercises.
Chester, we've got some amazings coming through.
Oh, I'm
Put that
so
out there.
happy that, thank you. I'm so happy that people are enjoying the exercise, and I think people are going to be amazed at how you can apply this to really enhance learning. Again, memory is fundamental to learning. We're going to get into how to apply this later on. Michael, why don't you go ahead? It looks like I'm seeing almost 100 answers already. So when you're ready, Michael, please just read off maybe 3 or so names and people's answers.
Amanda writes, monkey, iron, rope, kite, house, paper, shoe, worm, envelope, pencil, river, rock, tree, cheese, dollar.
Right on.
Um,
Perfect.
Yeah, the list is long. Blake writes, monkey, iron, rope, kite, house, paper, shoe, worm, envelope, pencil, river, rock, tree, cheese, dollar.
Perfect. Great job. Just one more.
Just one more. I'll do amethyst. I like the long list. Monkey, iron, rope, kite, house, paper, shoe, worm, envelope, pencil, river, rock, tree, cheese, dollar.
Great job. All right. So I'm sure that if you weren't 100% with that exercise, you were close to it. And if you were missing 1 or 2 words, all you would need to do is play through the story, maybe just a couple more times, and it would get solidified in your mind. You could also very easily, I encourage you to give this a try if you'd like, but I won't have you do it in the chat because we have a lot more to cover and limited time today. But you would just go through the story backwards, and you could very easily perfectly recall those words in reverse. All right. This is a very powerful technique. It is called the story method. All right. And it is just one of many techniques that memory champions like myself use to pull off what at first seem like amazing feats of memory. So they've had me on a lot of different TV shows over the years, Science Channel, Discovery Channel, news programs. Most recently, it was BBC World News. But I want to make it very clear to everyone today, there is nothing different about my brain compared to anyone else's. I've just learned these types of techniques that are very powerful and effective, and I've put in a little bit of fun, training, and practice. Anyone can dramatically improve their memory capability from where it is today with just the right approach and a little bit of fun practice. Now, one quick application of this simple story method would be to give a presentation, limiting the amount of notes that you use, eventually reaching to where you can give a presentation perfectly with no notes so that you can maintain eye contact with your audience and be a more effective and persuasive speaker. How to do this, you would simply outline your talk, come up with the major points and subpoints. Once you have that, you could build a fun little story to remind you of each talking point. An example to better illustrate this, let's say I were going to talk about healthcare in the US, always a hot topic for discussion in the US. Maybe my first image is simply of a stethoscope that the doctor uses to check your heartbeat. That's just going to remind me the broad topic for discussion today is healthcare. First talking point that I want to hit on with the audience is the high cost of healthcare in the US. Maybe shooting out of the stethoscope are a bunch of $100 bills, all right? Next thing I might want to touch on in the presentation is that under current healthcare programs, in order to get certain things covered, sometimes we need to find a way to cut through or navigate through a lot of red tape. So wrapping itself around the $100 bills is all of this red tape, all right? I think that should give you an idea of how you can give a presentation, minimizing the amount of notes, eventually reaching to where you won't use any notes at all. This could also be when you're preparing for a meeting, you want to demonstrate that you've done research, that you have some knowledge and expertise in that particular area. Again, showing that it's just now in your knowledge bank. I'm going to hit on this concept a little bit more detail later on, but for now I want to get into some general benefits of this type of memory training, this type of memory exercise. Then I'm going to teach you another technique, get into specific applications again, but for now, general benefits. You will improve your memory in general, even independent of using these types of memory techniques, but that's only assuming after the presentation today, you're encouraged, hopefully, because you realize it can be fun and easy to remember things, you'll start to use your memory more and more force your brain to go through that process of commit information to memory and recall it. Commit information to memory, recall it. If you do that, your memory is going to get better in general because your brain is very trainable. The more you force your brain to perform a particular function over and over again, the more it signals to your brain that that's something important that you need to be able to do, so your brain finds a way to make itself better at doing it. Your brain is so trainable. An example, there was a segment on a science program about a guy who was in an unfortunate accident, and a pole went through a certain area of his brain. He completely lost the ability to perform certain functions. But what happened is, with rehabilitation and training, the brain rewired itself. Areas of the brain that, and most people would have nothing to do with performing those functions, they actually took over, and he regained many of those abilities. Now, he did not make a 100% recovery, but he regained many of those abilities due to a rewiring of the brain. Your brain is very trainable, but the opposite is also true. If you never have your brain perform a particular function, if you're always writing everything down, if you're always entering things into electronic devices, what you are saying to your brain is, hey, at this point in my life, it's not important for me to be able to remember things anymore. So it makes sense that you are going to start to lose that ability over time. And unfortunately, it can reach a point to where it starts to become a little bit scary at what we're no longer able to remember, because we're weakening that memory muscle in the brain. The use it or lose it principle does apply to your memory. One quick example, phone numbers. We all used to be able to remember the phone numbers of so many friends and family members. I remember growing up, my parents would also give me emergency numbers that they thought were important for me to know in case of emergency. We could all do that. But nowadays, you give somebody even one phone number and they feel paralyzed in their ability to remember even one number. It's getting so bad that you have people out there today that don't even know their own phone number. I think it's a good example of the use it or lose it principle. One other thing I think we can relate to: navigation. So you have people that have been driving around in a city for 5+ years, and if something happens to be wrong with the app, or there's something wrong with the network connection in that area, they will have to pull over, restart their phone a bunch of times, hope that the issue resolves itself, or they won't even be able to navigate to what should be really well-known landmarks in the city. It's another example of what happens when you completely turn off your brain and you're 100% dependent upon technology. I do think there is a little bit of danger in this digital dependency. But for today, I want to focus only on the positive aspects, and that is, if you will make it a point to exercise your memory, work on developing your memory skills, you can keep your memory strong and, in fact, improve it at any age. Now, some people don't believe me on the any age part, so I want to give a couple of examples to try to counteract that thinking a bit. So pre-COVID pandemic, I had been teaching a workshop in San Francisco. Now I'm much more focused on online training. I've developed an online memory school. I'll talk about it at the very end in case anybody's interested in that. But pre-pandemic, I was doing a workshop. People from all over the US had attended. People would even fly out from New York, Miami, different parts of the country, because it was one of the only workshops like it in the world. All age ranges, ages 8 from people all the way up to people in their 90s were in the workshop. People were taking it for various reasons. I can tell you that I saw many times people in their 60s, 70s, totally outperforming working professionals in their 20s and 30s in terms of the memory exercises. My favorite was, I had a woman one weekend, 85 years old. She didn't make one mistake the whole day. Everybody was amazed with her. I'm amazed with her. We're Facebook friends now. And when I see her posts, if she's not taking another course, she's attending an art function. She's clearly made it a point to keep herself mentally stimulated. And I feel that has to be at least part of how she's staying so razor sharp, even into her mid-80s. Second example, I represented the United States in the World Memory Championship after I won the US Memory Championship. And there was a guy there from Malaysia in his late 60s, so decades older than me. This guy kicked my butt so badly. He actually memorized the entire dictionary, Advanced Learner's Edition, in English and Chinese. He's known as the walking dictionary, Dr. Yip Sway Choi from Malaysia. These are the types of people you get over at the World Memory Championship. He actually did a demonstration for people from the audience and people from the media that were there filming. They would call out any page number, and give a row column combination within a few seconds. He could tell you the word there and its definition from memory. He could even do the reverse. If you just yelled out a page number, gave a row column combination, he could do it. If you just called out a word, chair, he would say, oh, chair's on page 634, row 3. Both directions, he was perfect every time. Late 60s, later, a little bit later in life, still razor sharp in terms of memory, but he is training his memory just a few times a week with these types of exercises that we're talking about today. So you can keep your memory sharp, but you need to work on it. Now, you will improve your memory with this. You'll also improve visualization ability. If you stick to this type of training, these exercises, you're going to be able to create these images that we're talking about more quickly and see the imagery more clearly. Visualization ability has been linked in many studies to more than memory. It's been linked to overall intelligence. In fact, when you are faced with complex new information that you need to digest, you have the ability to break that down into a simple series of images that you can picture. It improves your ability to understand the information. Visualization is very important. You'll definitely develop it with this type of memory training. This is also really good exercise in creativity and imagination, coming up with these creative and imaginative stories. In addition, this is a good workout from the brain. Everybody is recommending nowadays a brain exercise program in addition to a physical exercise program. Now, if you are destined to develop Alzheimer's or another form of dementia down the line, unfortunately, there's no doctor, no researcher that can say, hey, just do these exercises, take these vitamins, you're not going to get dementia. Nobody knows how to prevent it from happening. But what they do believe is that by engaging in rigorous brain exercise, you can build up what they're calling cognitive reserve. You all would like to look that up later. Cognitive reserve is the terminology often used in the research. And what this basically means is building up some extra brain muscle. And if you do unfortunately develop some form of dementia down the line, they say that you can have more years of mental clarity that you wouldn't have had otherwise because you've built up this cognitive reserve extra brain muscle. One of the best ways they say you can do this is by learning foreign languages. When you are learning foreign languages, you're building up so many extra brain connections. It's very good exercise for your brain. Of course, learning languages is much easier when you develop your memory skills because a major part of learning a language is memorizing the new vocabulary. I actually cover learning Korean in my memory school, and then we cover how to apply it to really any language that you might want to learn. Now, I want to get back into specifics, a specific exercise, and then some applications. Then we're going to get into names in more detail, as I promised, and then we're going to do Q&A. That is the plan. I just want to do a quick time check here. It looks like I've got about 20 minutes or 18 minutes before I need to start the Q&A, so we are on track. All right. So everyone, I'm going to have you visualize something again here, another interactive exercise. Just do your best to see what I described to you with your eyes opened or closed, whatever's more comfortable for you in terms of visualization. And then once you have gone through this visual exercise, I'm going to explain what we've actually added to your memory bank, your long-term memory, your knowledge bank without you realizing it. Although some of you might realize what I'm covering here. We'll see how it goes. All right, so everybody visualize some giant machines. These giant machines, I want you to see them smashing up a huge pile of gold and silver. So again, just have fun with this, relax. You see these giant machines smashing up a huge pile of gold and silver. Rising up out of the gold and silver, you see a bunch of vehicles, whatever types of vehicles you want to see, but vehicles is what we're going for here. Shooting out of the windows of the vehicles, a bunch of medicine. See, all sorts of medicine is coming out of the windows. Visualize that medicine and exploding out of the medicine, oil. It's probably easiest to visualize black petroleum oil is exploding out of that medicine. See the oil. All right, really that was it. This one is super quick and easy. I'm going to run through this again. You're going to replay through this little story that you've created in your mind. We had the giant machines smashing up the gold and silver, rising up. We had vehicles, out of the windows came medicine, and exploding out of that was oil. Let me go through this again for good measure. We had the giant machines. I want you to see that smashing up gold and silver, rising up vehicles. Next, it was medicine coming out of that, and then exploding out of the medicine, oil. All right, now you should be able to run through that story in your mind and be able to give me all of those items last time through: giant machines, smashing up the gold and silver, vehicles, medicine, oil. Take just 2 minutes. I believe this one is a little easier than the previous exercise. Take just about 2 minutes to write those out in the chat. Again, even if you don't write your answer in the chat, bare minimum, go through it mentally. And then I'm going to explain. You've added to your knowledge bank here something kind of interesting without realizing that.
Chester, they're all rolling in again. I don't know if you can see what's happening in the chat, but everybody's just like the same list, just rolling in.
Cool. Glad to hear it. We'll just give it about another minute, and then I'll have Michael just read off a couple answers here, and then I will explain what we've added to everyone's knowledge bank. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the incredible benefits that come with continuously adding to your knowledge that you might not realize at this point, might not be familiar with yet. All right, Michael, if you can go ahead and just read off a couple of answers.
Just a
People's
couple random. Yep,
Yeah.
from Harumi, machines, gold and silver, vehicles, window, machine, medicine, oil. Sorry, she didn't say machine, I said machine. It was medicine, then oil. Anissa writes, machines, silver and gold, vehicles, medicine, oil. Kevin writes, machines smashing large piles of gold and silver coins. Out comes medicines, popping crude oil. Adam writes, machines, gold and silver, vehicles, medicine, oil. And the list is on and on. Mary
Cool.
writes, machine. Yeah, yep. Joe Marie, everyone. Hi, everybody.
Cool. Great job again, everyone. And once again, if you weren't perfect on that, you'll just run through this visual 1 or 2 more times. You'll have it down solid. What you've all committed to your memory bank, knowledge bank there without realizing it, probably you all now know the top 5 exports of the UK. All right. So if you were to look that up, you're going to find that the UK's top exports are actually machinery, precious metals, vehicles, pharmaceuticals, and oil. So you start to see there how the image doesn't need to perfectly match what you're trying to remember. You are just building mental note cards or mental cue cards. This is a wonderful approach to continuously add to your knowledge. Really, if you could just find something, do some research, find what personally interests you, a topic area, try to commit to your knowledge even twice a month would be a good goal. And over time, you're really going to add to your knowledge. And this is not according to me, but actually according to Nobel Prize winning neuroscientist Eric Kandel. Adding to your knowledge bank is very important to improve your potential for creativity and innovation. So what is stored in your long-term memory or knowledge bank, the more you store there, the more potential you have for creative ideas. The less then you're restricted in terms of your brain's ability to generate new ideas. A quick example that I hope will clarify, perhaps an oversimplistic example, but I think it will get the point across. Let's say you go to Brazil. All right, you go to Brazil and you're trying a new fruit that you haven't had before, maracuya. I'm not sure that that's how it's pronounced, but you try this maracuya fruit and you're thinking, wow, this is so delicious, incredible. You're enjoying the experience of that maracuya and you think, wow, we don't really, eat this over in the US. I bet I could make a maracuya pie and it would be wonderful, delicious. Maybe I can open up some maracuya pie shops in the Bay Area. It might be a huge hit over there, right? So you came up with that idea. Your brain generated that idea upon experiencing that new fruit, but that was wholly dependent upon you knowing what a pie is. The knowledge of what a pie is had to already be in your knowledge bank in order for your brain to generate that particular idea. So I hope that makes it clear that the more that you add to your knowledge bank, the more ideas you can generate as you're going through life, experiencing things. And when you're not adding to your knowledge bank, when you're saying, I can just Google everything, I don't need to add to my knowledge, you're actually restricting, without probably realizing it, your creative potential. So I hope that you enjoyed that exercise and that you will use it to try and add interesting things to your knowledge on a regular basis. Now I'm going to get into some additional tips for names in the next 5 or so minutes, so that I'll have 5 to at least 10 to 15 minutes left for the Q&A. So I covered coming up with visuals for names, but I want you to add 4 steps to that, all right? From this day forward, whenever you are introduced to someone, step number 1, repeat the name, shake their hand if you can. So you're introduced to someone named John, you just will shake their hand, nice to meet you, John, or pleased to meet you, John. That might seem totally obvious, but a lot of times when we're being introduced to someone, our mind is all over the place. We're thinking about what we're going to eat for dinner later. We're thinking about the next session of the conference. A lot of times we don't pay any attention to the name. That first step forces you to pay attention for at least 1 second. That's the only way that you could repeat the name back to the person, all right? Step number 2, early on in your interaction with the person, ask them a question using their name. So John, how do you know Chester? John, how long have you been with this organization? Just one question. Now, I want to clarify. I don't mean use the name over and over again to where it seems a little bit weird in the conversation. Really, just using it once is enough to reinforce it and prevent the name from just going in one ear and out the other ear. Step 3, take a few seconds or less to think of a connection between the name and anything at all that you already know. And I mean anything. So John, maybe you think of John Lennon. It could be a famous person like that. Maybe a character from a TV show or movie has that same name. You have a relative that shares that name with the person. Thinking of a connection between the name and literally anything at all that you already know really helps it stick better in your mind. Step 4, whenever you leave the party, the meeting, whatever type of function it might be, make it a point to say goodbye to people actually using their name. That's going to go a long way toward helping you to remember more of those names the next time you see those people. And if at that point you've already started to forget some of the names, ask them again right then and there, because at that point, I don't feel they're as likely to be offended. At that point, they probably are more likely to appreciate the fact that you care enough to remember their name for the next time you see them. You're expressing interest in the person. That in turn makes them more interested in you and what you're about. It helps to build a relationship. In How to Win Friends and Influence People, that famous personal success book, it was written that the sweetest sound to a person in any language is the sound of their own name, and also that everyone's favorite subject is themselves. So in fact, remembering people's names, things about them, it helps you to build better business, personal relationships. Think about the most popular people that are involved with various organizations that you might be a part of. The most popular people tend to know everybody, right? Know everybody's name, know their kids' names, know things they like, and so on. This really helps to increase popularity, likability, and on the other end, when you're not good with names, it can hurt relationships. So work on that. I think those 4 steps will help you. And also try to combine that with the visuals that I talked about earlier, and maybe even link it to something about how the person looks. So if you're meeting someone named Mike and you think this Mike has cool looking hair, maybe you imagine that the microphone's getting tangled up in his hair. So the next time you see the person, all you have to do is ask yourself, what's unique to me about their look? What you personally noticed before is very likely what you personally will notice again. And the image that you've placed there will come right back to you, and it's going to remind you of the name. Now, this does take a little bit of practice. These are memory skills that we're developing. It's a new skill, a new approach to memory. But when you do work on it, there are tremendous benefits, and this process can be a lot of fun. Now, I'm about to get into the Q&A, but I always want to have, my goal with every presentation is to have a long-lasting positive impact on your life. I want to give you an opportunity for further training to go deeper with this if you'd like, if that interests you. So the best place to go is memoryschool.net. You can visualize maybe a giant fishing net to remember that it's .net, memoryschool.net. And if you have the ability in another window or on another device, maybe go there now, because I do have an opportunity only available to some of you on the webinar today. Memoryschool.net, we cover a wide variety of techniques to improve your memory in general, things that apply to various information types. We then get into any information that contains numbers, playing cards, anything abstract like that, more abstract information. We cover how to remember dates, percentages, facts, figures, and so on. We get into names in much more detail, many more techniques that I wasn't able, that I'm already out of time here. And I simulate introducing you to people. So you have an online slideshow. You're going to see pictures. This is John. This is Nancy, and so on. You're going to really develop that ability to remember names. You'll be better than ever with names. Then we cover presentations, sample presentations you'll go through with more techniques. Foreign languages, again, I cover Korean, make it clear how to apply the techniques to any language. And then there is training material, exam material for professional development. Also, if you have kids or grandkids in school, this cuts study time in half, improves retention, provides them with a much more fun and interesting framework to use when they need to learn things for school. It's great for kids in school. And as part of all of this, when you sign up for the Memory School, I actually give you access for 2 devices. So parents can have access on one device for professional development. Kids can have access on another device to help them do better in school. If anybody was already on the website, you'll see it's only $200 to initially enroll. It's not thousands of dollars like some professional development courses, some Tony Robbins courses. So very reasonable to get started, $200. And then there's just a monthly access fee for ongoing training, continued access for as long as you want to remain a member of the Memory School. I did set up for this special conference code CAL. So my alma mater, CAL, C-A-L is the code. If you are one of the first 25 people to use it, it will wipe out the $200 enrollment fee completely. I always have to set in the system how many times the code can be used, in this case 25. I do that because if you're someone that is already interested, you feel like this can help your professional development or help your kids, I want to give you maybe a little bit of a bump to take action, because I know this is really going to benefit you in your career, personal life, in various ways. So memoryschool.net, hopefully Teresa or Michael can put that in the comments for everyone, and the code is CAL, C-A-L, valid for the first 25 people to use it. Wipe out the $200 enrollment fee. That would leave you with only $40 to get started today. So get on that, and I'll take questions now on anything memory related or anything related to the Memory School. I look forward to people's questions.
Wow. Thank you so much, Chester. The first question we have that came up is from Shauna. How can we apply this to complex concepts and material that is dense with data and information?
Yes, very good question there. So all of this can be effective, what we've talked about today, but you need to be a little bit flexible in your application. Let me cover an example I think will clarify from physics, all right? So from physics, you're going to learn about convection, all right? Convection is the transfer of heat from an area of higher temperature to an area of lower temperature. That is the definition of convection. Now, how are you going to commit this complex new term to memory? Well, what I do is I come up with something that I can temporarily visualize to represent the new term to help me build the story, all right? So convection, what I'm going to temporarily use is a convention, all right? So in this case, I'm using sort of a sound-alike concept. I can easily visualize a convention. There are people up here at the higher area attending the convention, all right? There are people down in the lower area attending the convention, and a fire breaks out in the upper area. People are running, trying to escape from the fire. That fire represents heat. I can then see the fire transferring down to the lower area, and people are running, trying to escape from the fire. So I can very easily see that visual. I'm seeing in my mind the transfer of heat from an area of higher temperature to an area of lower temperature. Now, what was that convention? It was actually representative temporarily of convection. So now I have that whole new term committed to memory. This is very powerful and effective. Using this approach, you can memorize even 100 new complex terms a day in a course like physics. Hopefully that clarifies.
Thank you. Next question, Emily asks, daydreaming seems like visualization practice, but is it?
So daydreaming is, of course, visualization. I mean, we are seeing visuals running through our mind, and that is very good. There are different sorts of benefits to daydreaming. One tip I get into detail, if anybody ends up following me on Instagram, I give tips from around the world, and daydreaming activates something called the default mode system that neuroscientists have recently discovered. So that's one thing. But really there are benefits to that, but really what I would ask you to do for the benefits in terms of memory training and in terms of that creativity and imagination is to actively practice consciously coming up with visuals to represent different types of information. So that's really my area and what I help people to work on.
Rachel asks a question that was my question too. I love learning languages, but forget them quickly when not used. Any tips? Also, any recommendations on how not to confuse languages that are similar, like Italian and Spanish, with each other?
Yes. So with all of these techniques, what we're actually doing is we're using more of the brain. And this helps you to take information from working memory, which is the memory that lasts for a few seconds or less, eventually into short-term memory, minutes, hours, days, eventually into long-term memory. So these sorts of techniques help you get things into long-term memory, so it's going to stay there longer. Now, let's say you've reviewed the information on one day. I would encourage you to review it maybe a week later, 3 weeks later, then maybe a month later, and it's going to help it solidify it even in the longer term. Then if you would do a review 3 months after that, you're going to know it even longer term. So you want to, ideally for languages, combine these sorts of concepts with spaced out repetition, reviews done over time, as opposed to cramming, which is what most people do when they're studying a language, and also students in school. Cramming is only good for short-term memory. But combine these techniques with spaced repetition, then you're going to know it longer, but you do need to eventually review to keep it in your long-term memory. And then how to not confuse languages. Well, you're going to need to learn a system that I didn't cover today, but it is covered in the online memory school, memoryschool.net. You all have CodeCal, unless 25 people already signed up. It might not be working already at this point, but it is covered there. And you're going to then be able to build even thousands of basically mental filing cabinets, all right? And you'll be able to file away hundreds of words for one language in a certain series of filing cabinets, and the hundreds of words for a different language in a completely different set of filing cabinets. So you're organizing, filing away the information in specific locations so they don't get all jumbled up, mixed up in your brain, all right? So hopefully that better answers that question.
Thank you. I do want to, David has a question that a few others have chimed in also. How do I make my brain focus when I'm reading and remember what I'm reading?
Very good question. So one thing that you can do that will help a bit is while you are reading, try and see what you're reading. Try and produce in your mind like a movie or cartoon playing in your head, visuals as you're reading the information. Adding that visual component is going to aid retention. And you can really just get better at this with practice. Also, when you're done reading a chapter, try and ask yourself questions, outline what are the key points from that chapter, and then you can commit the key points to memory using the types of techniques that we talked about today and much more that you'll learn at the online memory school. So that will definitely improve your ability to retain more of what you're reading.
Perfect. I think we've got 6 more minutes. We go till 3:10. Yes. So Julia asks, and we got a couple of thumbs up also. I'm a visual learner, so this helped me out a lot. However, let's say if my partner is an auditory learner, would you recommend the same tips, or would auditory learners use different techniques?
Great question. And you'll be happy to hear that I myself was always more of an auditory learner. So I did really well in college at Berkeley by listening quietly and very attentively to the lecture, so that when I got later to the books, it was more of a review already at that point. I was always more of an auditory learner, but I developed my visualization ability and visual learning ability with this type of training. And when you can add this to the already existing auditory learning, you're just even stronger. Your memory is going to be even stronger. You're going to be, it's even more powerful in terms of learning.
Another really relevant question with a lot of thumbs up. Do people with ADHD have a harder time than neurotypical folks?
It has been my experience that people with ADHD actually do incredibly well with this type of training, because people with ADHD and also dyslexia tend to be very strong visually. They tend to be good with visual learning. So this is a very natural approach for them to adopt. There's actually a story on my website. There's a blog, and you can read about someone that came to me with ADHD and dyslexia, and I trained him for the United States Memory Championship. He came to me mixing up even just a small sequence of numbers. The digits would get mixed around, but I got him to competing in the US Memory Championship, and he memorized officially an 80-digit sequence forwards and backwards perfectly using these types of techniques, specifically a system for numbers that's covered in the memory school. So I feel this works really well. Based on my experience working with people, I do believe it's effective for people that are a little bit different in terms of how they learn.
Wow.
And think.
Thank you for that. There's sort of related. There's a question: what if you're not auditory learner, such as someone who may be hard of hearing?
So hard of hearing, you need to somehow get to the visual, because these, as people have mentioned, are very much visual based techniques. So if you hear the information incorrectly, you might then of course produce the wrong visual. But if instead of having the information fed to you through auditory, maybe you're seeing the information on slides or something, as long as you're able to produce the visuals, then you can learn the information using these types of techniques. So that's all I would say, is that somehow you need to get to the visual. Of course, if you are hard of hearing and you're being fed the information spoken, somebody speaking the information to you, you're going to be at a disadvantage there.
I think, can we do another one? Can we do another question? It's 3:08. Sure. Is your course geared toward children as well?
Oh, yes. So I really developed the course with the idea in mind that it was going to help not only working professionals, but also kids in school. So there is plenty in there to benefit both classes of people, working professionals, people that want professional development, as well as for kids to do better in school. Really fun, interactive exercises. If you enjoyed today's presentation, you're definitely going to enjoy the Memory School, because that's all it is, fun and interactive exercises. And again, memoryschool.net. Hopefully Teresa or Michael put that in the chat. I haven't been able to check that. And code CAL, valid for 25 people if it hasn't already been used 25 times.